Welcome to T4G Sports. So, the NCAA votes to accept the $2.8 billion settlement, and it's going to change everything. There's a lot to this, okay? There is a lot to this. So, we're going to jump into this and make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, click the notification bell, and let's light it up. So, the NCAA is a giant whale carcass of a governing body, and that's how governing bodies work. They're giant whale carcasses that they're like Jabba the Hutt sitting on a platform, and they're consumers, they're not producers. No one in the NCAA right now working for the NCAA is doing stiff arms to make the money. They're not doing layups. They're not doing that. Yeah, you could say, well, they market or whatever. Yeah, but you're not the producer. You're the consumer of the product. Okay, that's what you are. That's what governing bodies are. They're consumers. Okay, the only layups they're doing is the layups from the check that they get to their bank account. That's the only layup that they're doing. And for a long time, they use this phrase, student athlete. And to me, that's been the saddest state of affairs, because that was only a term that you used in order to not pay these athletes. Okay, well, they're student athletes. They're not professional athletes. They're student athletes. Yeah, except for they're bringing you guys in, truckloads of cash. And what did these student athletes get from this, which is so unfair? They got nothing, some of which they didn't even graduate. Others, when they did graduate, they got crappy degrees, and they got like a jacket, and then they got like a ring, and then, hey, thank you for making that money, and there you go. And then these football players are sacrificing everything to make these conferences, universities, the NCAA money, and on top of which, they're sacrificing that to have other sports even exist, because without them, the volleyball team's gone. Okay, and then they're putting their bodies at risk and their minds at risk with CTE disease. That's a real thing. And then it's there, and it's happening today. CTE disease is a real thing. And so they're walking away and they get nothing. And they're filling a stadium of 100,000+ people, and that's what they get. So I'm glad the student athlete thing is gone. I don't ever want to hear student athlete again, because to me, it's a sad term. So under the terms of the new proposed settlement, the NCAA would pay $2.77 billion over the next 10 years to former and current college athletes who were denied but now defunct rules the ability to earn money from endorsement and sponsorship deals dating back to 2016. Okay, which athletes are going to get what? I don't know. That's the question. The NCAA and conferences would also agree to establish revenue sharing system. And this is the important part, because this is them admitting that it is now professional football, with schools allowed, though not required, to spend about $21 million each year on their athletes. That number could grow over time if revenue increases, and that number will grow over time because the revenue is only increasing. So what does this $21 million mean in revenue sharing? Well, this is your first ever salary cap. Welcome to pro college football. That's what it is, folks. It's professional college sports, particularly for basketball and football, mainly football. So what does this mean for everyone else? Well, I talked about this in previous videos. We went over this and talked about it with ACC fans. We talked about it with Notre Dame fans. And, we said that when the salary cap does come out, when the TV revenue sharing does happen, that it's going to be monumental, and it's going to be a huge shift for the entire sport. And it's going to particularly put a lot of pressure on everyone beside the Big Ten and the SEC. Like we mentioned, the Big Ten signed a deal for 7 years for $1.15 billion. The SEC signed a 10-year deal for over $700 million. To them, this $21 million is not that hard. And NIL still exists. Okay, so they can still, it's going to be more structured. There's going to be more of a paper trail as far as I understand. But some of these schools, think about it, they were paying, $20, $30 million perhaps on NIL per year? That's a lot of money. So you add that on top of this $21 million. Well, Big Ten teams are like, yeah, no problem. The Big Ten teams are like, yeah, this is no big deal at all. Like, we can do this. The SEC teams are like, yeah, the big ones from there are like, yeah, this is no big deal. We can do this as well. So they're going to be able to push this number up to potentially $50 million in a single season just to pay for their football team, or part of it, and then some goes to the basketball team or what have you. So that's a massive amount of money. So it is now the first ever college sports professional league, and that's what you're seeing now. But what does this mean for the ACC? What does this mean for the Big 12? What does this mean for Notre Dame? Well, it means that things just got a whole hell of a lot worse for you. Okay, because Notre Dame, I know they're rich. I understand that. I know they're rich. However, this is becoming insanely expensive. Because if you can't take your TV revenue sharing and apply that like the Big Ten and the SEC can do it, then what does that mean for you? That's going to come more out of your donors' pockets, and that's going to get rough over time. That's going to start wearing thin because they're going to go, well, dude, you could get more money if you went to the Big Ten or the SEC. Then we wouldn't have to fork out as much cash. And there's going to be pressure applied because independent for like Notre Dame, independence is great. And I love that they're independent. I love that they've strived to stay independent. I get that. But personally, I think that Notre Dame knows that they're going to join the Big Ten. I think Notre Dame just doesn't want to be the first one, because if they joined right now, college football is officially dead besides the Big Ten and SEC. They would for sure collapse the entire state of college football. However, they already know that Florida State and Clemson are scrambling like hell to get out, because Florida State and Clemson already see the writing on the wall and going, Jesus Christ, we can't compete. There's no competing. You couldn't compete on just NIL straight up. Now that they're doing revenue sharing and the Big Ten has way more money in TV revenue, it doesn't make it any easier. It makes it way harder. Okay? So they already know that Clemson and the rest of them in the ACC who are valuable are going to try to get out quick as hell. That they're going to, one way or another, they're going to escape that contract. It's going to happen. And they're going to be joining the Big Ten, and they're going to be joining the SEC. And then I think that's when Notre Dame is going to say, oh, well, we have no choice. Because the problem with independence for Notre Dame is that you're independent in every sense of the word. Okay? And that's scary, because if the ACC is gone and they went to the Big Ten and SEC, then what does Notre Dame really do? Are you just going to plead with the Big Ten and the SEC of like, well, we know we don't want to join you, but can we schedule you? And that just sucks to be in that situation, to be like, because what if they just say no? Literally, what if they say no? What if the SEC and the Big Ten, which they're already working together, what if they're planning on creating their own super conference by just combining forces? You think even if you join the Big Ten, it's not going to matter, because the Big Ten is going to also be making the SEC rich, and the SEC is going to be making the Big Ten rich. So what happens if that becomes a reality, which I think it will become a reality? Then Notre Dame's going to be on the outskirts, and you're going to be the independent of what? What are you going to be? You're going to be the Notre Dame of the Notre Dames, and that's it? You're going to, like, who are you going to face? The Big 12? That's not going to be a pretty sight. So this is monumental. It's a huge shift, and I think that this just made it even more real. I think in the next 2 years, the ACC is toast. I just think they're toast. One way or another, they're toast. This is just my personal opinion. And then I think Notre Dame already knows they're going to join. I just think Notre Dame is kind of letting things play out, and they're waiting to see. But I think that they know they're going to join the Big Ten. I think that it's, to them, they just look at it and go, this is just, it's too easy. It's too much money. And it's the way things are moving forward. And that's just the way it is. So there's a lot to this. There's a lot to this. They are going away from, I don't know if they say it where they say it in here, but they're going away from scholarships as well. They are going to a roster size, so that's going to even increase even more for the haves and compared to the have-nots. They're going to be able to spend more money, theoretically, on their roster. And they could be like, hey, we want to pay more money on our third string guy because, hey, that's just how it is here. We want to spend more money. And the amount of money becomes really, really crazy. It actually does. It becomes very, very nuts. So they talk about how much will current and future players be paid, right? The schools among the Power 4 conferences, it's kind of still crazy to see the Power 4, are expected to pay current players roughly $20 million annually as part of a new revenue sharing program. This figure will fluctuate from school to school, reflecting an estimated share of 22% of annual revenue generated by Power 4 schools. Okay, that's huge. The agreement is expected to include a cap on revenue sharing, which could start as high as $22 million annually per school, according to Yahoo Sports. Local decisions, I think, are good at times where schools that have more resources can do more, ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips said last week. So some flexibility in a final decision and final agreement will be helpful for our schools. Your schools went out. Okay, Jim Phillips, you already know as good as all of us, your schools, one way or another, will be out of the ACC. Whether that's now or 10 years from now, the writing's on the wall, nothing you can do to change that. Former Pac-12 schools are included in the suit as part of the pay for past damages. According to multiple reports, the Power 5 conferences are responsible for roughly 40% of the NCAA's school reductions for damages, between $597 million to $730 million. Those schools are expected to see an average drop between $1 million and $2 million in annual revenue for the NCAA to fund their settlement. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot of money, but that is a lot of money. Okay, that is quite a bit of money, because this is one thing that you guys want to understand, is the amount of money that some of these conferences are bringing in or some of these teams are bringing in. It is ridiculous, because like they talk about the math working here, says more than 50% of group of 5 schools earn less than $40 million annually in revenue. Okay, and you can talk about all the percentages, but just know that this is going to hurt, right? It's going to hurt. The Power 5 conferences, then including the Pac-12, combined for more than $3.3 billion in revenue for the 2022 fiscal year. According to federal tax records, Ohio State earned $251.6 million in revenue last year to lead all Power 5 schools. You remember the video we did when we said Ohio State's going to be the scariest program moving forward? This is a huge reason as to why. Okay, Ohio State could go out and say, we want whatever AD we want. Okay, we want to go get the coaches that we want. We want to go, because they flat out are the biggest. If you were to put them as a company, they would be the biggest company. Okay, they would be able to say, hey, we could do whatever we want. I mean, could you imagine like Nick Saban on Ohio State with that kind of money, what he could have done? That was Ohio State raw too. That's without them having like a Nick Saban as a coach. Like if Nick Saban announced like, oh, I'm coming back and I'd go to Ohio State, I mean, what he could do with that team is just absolutely insane, because they just flat out are they're the biggest entity, right? So $1 to $2 million to those big schools, particularly like a school like Ohio State, they could Venmo you that in an afternoon of drinking coffee. Like they don't care. That $1 to $2 million, you think that to them is like anything? No, I mean, sure, it's something, but to them, they're like, that's it? Whew, we got out of that one big. To the other schools, that may not be the case, even in the Power 4. Other schools outside of the Power 4, the group of 5, they're looking at that and going, that sucks. That's a lot of money. I mean, you're talking, they said $40 million annually, right? $1 to $2 million on top of that, on top of looking at the revenue sharing, that gets eaten up quick. Then you're looking at it and you're going, you're already struggling to turn a profit. And then these numbers hit you and you're going, oof, this is becoming incredibly painful to even have a football program for some of these universities. So it is tough. It's unfortunate, but it is the way things are. So another thing is the roster sizes and scholarships limits will change, okay? The new model will likely lift scholarship limits. It will lift it, in my opinion, but also limit roster sizes. Those details are expected to be finalized in the next few months and could vary within Division I football teams. Theoretically, football roster sizes could be trimmed from 120 to 100 players, but scholarships could be provided to all players instead of the currently mandated 85. That's huge news, because they could be like, yeah, we don't need to rely on walk-ons anymore. We're going to just go recruit like hell. So that's intense. That's very intense where it's going. That makes it real. That makes it very intriguing, and it really could shape how these teams are constructed and even the level at which they are constructed. The next part about this that is very interesting is the Title IX and antitrust questions remain. Okay, the plaintiffs in the House suit are expected to give up their right to file antitrust lawsuits against the NCAA rules for 10 years. And the plaintiff attorneys are expected to drop 2 additional pending antitrust cases against the NCAA. This agreement could be strengthened if the NCAA is finally successful in lobbying Congress, which could codify the settlement with legislation protecting the NCAA and its members with antitrust exemption. Congress, however, has been slow to act. No, really? Congress? Governing bodies are slow to act? That's interesting. Never thought that. After being presented with more than a dozen proposals concerning NIL guardrails over the last several years. Title IX also complicates matters. It definitely does. And future court battles could loom. The unspoken truth among administrators is that it seems unlikely they will advocate for equal pay for athletes whose sports earn less than football and men's basketball. Here's the big thing about this, and we'll go over this first. It's very, very likely we're going to see non-revenue sports get massacred, said Jason Belzer, president of Student Athlete NIL. Title IX is going to be a very big battle. How are you going to stop it? It's going to be tough. Okay, and this is very true. Very, very true. It is going to complicate things. It's going to make things very, very intriguing, to say the least. So there's a lot of concern about what's going to happen with Title IX, and how this is going to, how this money is going to be distributed. Because I'm sure there are people on one side that are going to say, well, this should be distributed equally amongst everyone. And then there's going to be those on the other side that are going to say, well, this is professional sports and they're not babies anymore. They're grown-ups. This is what the grown-ups wanted and this is what the grown-ups get. Okay, professional sports are not fair. Not everyone gets to be a professional quarterback in the league or get paid like a professional quarterback. Your quarterback showing up in a G-Wagon and your, captain of your volleyball team's showing up in a 1998 Honda Civic, and that's the way it works. I mean, think about NIL works already. NIL, they don't even share their NIL with their own teammates. The quarterback gets paid more money in NIL, and he's not required to share that money with anybody because he's a professional athlete. And he's getting paid for his services to go to that school and to provide a product on the field. Okay, so there's a lot of questions about this because if you have that $22 million, you got to split it equally, and you're like Ohio State. You already saw that Ohio State gets paid more than anyone else when it comes to revenue at the end of the year. Okay, so are you going to say to them, like, hey, their football team has to take a pay cut compared to Alabama, Georgia, and everyone else? Like, you guys got to get paid less money because we have so many sports programs here at Ohio State that we almost have as many sports programs as Navy and Stanford. So you got to take a pay cut and you're going to get paid less money. Well, you're going to see that revenue that they make at the end of the year start to dwindle because their star athletes are going to go elsewhere to make more money. So then what's going to happen then? Is it even legal, or are they going to sit there and start cutting sports left and right, and it's going to be a battle of who cuts the most sports out of all these football teams? Because we're talking professional sports. They're not babies. These are grown-ups with professional sports, and not everyone gets paid quarterback money. So is that what you're going to see? And on top of which, what happens if the football players in the future just say, hey, man, we're sick of sharing all this money with everyone. We want to get what we deserve. We're out here sacrificing. We're filling the stadium over 100,000 people. And then the football team just says, like, what if this happens? And the football team just says, fine, we're going to protest and we're just not going to play football anymore for however long it takes until you pay us what we're worth. Like, I'm not saying that they're going to do that. I'm not saying I think they should do that. I'm just saying, what if they do that? Are you going to force them to play football? Is that what you're going to do? What if Ohio State, all the big boys, Georgia, Alabama, all of them say, fine, we're just going to stop playing football? What happens to those sports then? They'll die off anyways. That's the sad fact of reality. No one's going to these games. People don't care about the other sports like they do football and basketball, particularly football. They just don't. People like to pretend like they care, but they just don't. They're not showing up to those games. They're not buying their merch. They're not. Most of these people couldn't even name who's on their volleyball team, who's on their softball team, who's on their baseball team, who's on a lot of football fans could probably barely even name who's on their basketball team. There's a lot of questions, and there's no answers as of yet, but we're talking grown-up land here. We're talking literal professional sports now. So I don't know. It's going to be very interesting. I don't know what's going to happen with this. I'm very curious how this whole thing is going to play out. Let us know what you guys think down below.